7 p.m, Boxing Day 2016. A warm sitting room in Gloucestershire, filled with happiness, relations, and a certain degree of muddle. The debris of unwrapped presents, 4 or 5 dogs cantering around crazily, drinks being poured, a supper of roast ham and red cabbage cooking. My husband stands, convivial as always, reading out loud an amusing letter from the newspaper. My daughters and I are laughing. It's funny. He's funny. We're all wrapped in a warm glow of familiarity and love. He gets to the last line, the punchline, we think, and then his face, normally so animated, freezes. In that microsecond, I begin to say, "This isn't funny. Why are you pretending to?" I start to turn away crossly, and as I do, he falls, like a tree chopped down at the roots, his total collapse broken only partially by me. Within minutes, his face turns dark blue. And at that exact moment, the earth tips, and we all slide into a parallel universe. That dreadful day was how our story began. When Alan was diagnosed with autoimmune encephalitis a few weeks later, I had no idea what the implications were. And I really struggled with the fact that, as I say in the book, ordinary people like us don't get weird illnesses that no one's ever heard of. But I found out really, really early on that the best way to get through it was to connect with other people and to share experiences. Thank you so much, the Encephalitis Society, who have been fantastic, for inviting me here to speak today. My daughter Mads and I came to one of these conferences while Alan was still in hospital, and it gave us a lot of hope that maybe one day he would be well enough to attend himself, as he is today. But one of the things that struck me most was when an encephalitis survivor stood up and spoke passionately about how much he knew his illness had affected his wife and children, and how strongly he felt that they needed more support and encouragement. There are some excellent books that tell the story of encephalitis from the point of view of the people who've had it. But I wanted to share the experiences of how it feels to see the person you love become someone different. The brain injury that encephalitis caused in Alan has left him with serious difficulties with processing, insight and empathy, and perhaps most crucially, no short-term memory whatsoever. I hope that writing about all the things we used will help anyone affected by serious illness, especially injuries of the brain. I do cover many of the practical and financial implications of looking after someone with encephalitis, and much of the early chapters contains tips on how to navigate your way through the NHS. As some of the speakers have alluded to today, it's not easy. There's even a medical jargon buster at the end explaining what all the different words that doctors use mean. Do you know what abbreviations like TIA or HDU mean? Or words like phlebotomy or occlusion? I didn't. This extract is from the chapter entitled A Special Relationship. Building a relationship with a doctor is a bizarre experience. We want doctors to like us, and we want to like them. Straight away, we want them to be much more interested in us than is realistic. We know it's selfish, but we want them to prioritise our care or the care of those who matter to us. And we want them to mind about us and not be too busy. For many of us, a conversation with a doctor will be one of the most meaningful and memorable moments of our lives. But for the doctors, it's just another day at work, which means there's almost bound to be a sharp discrepancy between expectations and outcomes. Here are some of my do's and don'ts of how to talk and how to listen to doctors. Do record a conversation on your phone, and then you can play it back to yourself later. Do take a friend. Don't decide you don't like them. This is entirely counterproductive. Do carry a short written summary of your previous medical conditions. It's often much easier to give this to a new doctor than stammering through an explanation. Don't have preconceived ideas about the solution. Do listen and ask a doctor to repeat something if you need to. Do ask questions. Doctors are much happier with statistics than guesswork. For example, what percentage of patients with my illness survive is more likely to get an accurate answer than, how long have I got? Do make your questions personal and direct. Rather than saying, but what happens if the medicine doesn't work? Say, what should I do if I still have a high temperature tomorrow? Don't think that a doctor with poor personal skills is necessarily a bad doctor. But there's plenty of light-hearted advice too. Indeed, one of the longest chapters is about using the power of humour. Because, as many of you have hopefully discovered, brain injuries are terrible, but they can be really funny too. These extracts are from the chapter entitled Reasons to be Cheerful, How to be Happy in Hard Times. I hear the best-selling Irish author Marian Keyes speaking on Radio 2's Jeremy Vine show, and she says that one of the things that makes us human is that we use laughter as a survival mechanism. I quite agree. Weirdly, the darkest days can sometimes provide the funniest moments, and I'm sure she's right to think that it's our own body's way of coping. Humour is vital for getting you through the horrible times, and surely laughter is one of the most powerful weapons in our armoury. Anyone who knows a medical student will have heard about the many jokes and pranks that get them through the harrowing training. And one of the reasons the brilliant This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay has been so successful is that it's side-splittingly, eye-poppingly hilarious. Humour and illness may not seem like obvious partners, but they absolutely are. Our own moment for hysterical laughter comes a few days after Alan has come round from a week-long coma in intensive care. He's breathing on his own again, and he can talk, but his brain is so scrambled that he can't think of words for everyday things. The doctors hold up a pen, a notebook, a cup, and ask him what they are. But he just shakes his head in bafflement. The feeding tube has been taken out, and he's learning to eat by himself. Since we're there at supper time, the nurse suggests that my son and I help him to spoon up the meat, potatoes, and veg. We're chatting away to him as we do this, and Sam says, "Dad, what are those vegetables called that you're eating now? Those little round green things." He looks at them carefully. "Puh," he says. We nod. "Puh, puh, puh." "Yes, that's right," we say, willing him on. "Puh." Suddenly he smiles triumphantly. "Parrots!" he exclaims. We also did, and still do, get a lot of humour from Alan's confabulations. Confabulation, as many of you will know, is a rather wonderful word that means the production of fabricated, distorted, or misinterpreted memories about oneself or the world without the conscious intention to deceive. It occurs after a brain injury and is quite rare. The neurological explanation for exactly what's going on is still contested, but the simplest theory is that the brain is trying to fill in the blanks. The crucial thing is that a person who confabulates has no idea they're doing it and isn't doing it deliberately. They're also totally unconcerned when you point out the inconsistencies in what they're saying. Sometimes the confabulations are based on real memories, but sometimes they're triggered by entirely random thoughts. So during his year in hospital, Alan sometimes thought he was in an aeroplane because his ward was on the 10th floor and had a view over London, or in the Caribbean because it was really warm, or in Australia because all the radiologists had Aussie accents. But often it was impossible to work out where they were coming from. I arrive one morning at his bedside to find a little knot of keeny-beanical medical students clustered all around him. Throughout the time that Alan was in hospital, we all found it really heartening to hope that his experience would add to the general medical knowledge available. "Can we ask your husband some questions?" Even now, quite experienced medical professionals, from GPs to therapists, find it hard to comprehend that the answers they're going to get from someone with a brain injury are more than likely to be nonsense. One fresh-faced medic asks Alan what his job is, and without missing a beat, Al says, "A milkman. I'm a milkman." He then proceeds to explain in some detail what this entails, where his daily round is, how many pints he delivers, the fact that it's an enjoyable job because it's outdoors and he meets loads of different people, and so on. After about 5 minutes of this highly convincing baloney, the student turns to me with an earnest expression on his face. "That's right, is it, Mrs. Jessop?" And through my giggles, I explained that no, it isn't. My husband's not and never has been a milkman. To me, the thought of him pootling around like Benny Hill's Ernie seems totally ridiculous. But to the medic, of course, this unshaven, chatty old man in a hospital gown could be anyone. I think, where on earth did that come from? Did a nurse mention milk, maybe? Did one of the machines sound like a milk float? Or in fact, does he secretly want to be a milkman? Sharing moments like this with the family over supper lightened up some very dark days. And the fact that brain illnesses can be comedic is a huge contradiction in terms. Seeing someone you love talking twaddle is at best disconcerting, at worst terrifying. But I think to deny that it's also incredibly funny would be to deny what makes us human. But of course, there were plenty of days that weren't funny in the slightest. Encephalitis is an illness of the brain, but I think it's really important to acknowledge that looking after someone who has a brain injury can also really mess with your own head. This next extract is from the chapter about mental health. When Alan first became ill, I felt it was somehow very important that everybody should know that the damage to his brain was caused by a proper illness, by something detectable and measurable on a brain scan. I hated the thought that people might think it was due to what used to be called a nervous breakdown. This was partly because I hoped that if there was a physical cause, then it would be simpler to treat. But I confess it was also due to the stigma around mental health. To some extent, my "if you can see it, you can cure it" theory is true. We've all heard of cases where a brain tumour is eliminated and the person miraculously returns to full health. But there's still a colossal amount that scientists don't yet know about how the brain recovers after trauma, whether it's physical or mental, and the differences between physiological and psychological brain damage are not always so distinct. And the line between mental illness and mental health is a fuzzy one. Encephalitis, a stroke, a tumour, Alzheimer's and dementia are all things that can cause brain damage. Those who've suffered from stress, an eating disorder, depression, anxiety or OCD might not describe their brains as damaged, but whatever the reason a brain is malfunctioning, there's good scientific evidence that the same things will help or hinder its recovery. Rest, routine, company, tranquility, positivity and fresh air are good. And loneliness, incarceration, noise, anger, unkindness and hopelessness are not. Early on, I arrive in the high dependency unit to hear raucous shouting. An elderly woman is trying to get out of bed and is being restrained by the nurses. She's yelling furiously, using all manner of swear words without any care as to who hears her. I'm uncomfortable on her behalf, sorry for the staff, concerned for the other patients. It's horrible. Then a woman about my age comes in with a cup of tea. It's her daughter. She looks deeply embarrassed. "God," she says, "it's awful, isn't it? She's not usually like this. I didn't even know Mum knew those words. She'd hate it if she knew people were seeing her like this. She's such a gentle person." I'm ashamed to say that at the time I didn't believe her. I just couldn't imagine that someone's personality could change so completely. And although I smiled sympathetically at the woman, inside I was making my own judgments. A month later, I'm in a different hospital, watching my own kind, mild-mannered husband swearing at the lovely occupational therapist who's not allowing him to leave the ward. "F off!" he screams. "Just F off, all of you! F right off!" We were all mortified. All we could do was apologise, tell ourselves the staff must be used to it. By now, Alan had been moved to his own room with round-the-clock one-to-one care from registered mental health nurses. But next week, the self-locking mechanism to the ward door is broken and all the visitors have to come in another way. To my horror, I found out it's Alan who smashed it. Then worst of all, one morning the enormous plate glass window in his room is splintered right across, the long cracks temporarily mended with black gaffer tape, giving the room the appearance of a prison cell. Alan's pushed a drip stand into it. The violence of illness is extremely frightening. I discovered that ferocious mood swings are common after a brain injury, and it helps a lot just to know this. I also know now that someone who is ill cannot control their own mind, and rage in the mentally ill is not something to be ashamed of. Something that I felt helped a lot with my own mental health was getting out and about into nature. There are many studies that show how beneficial the natural world is to our health, and in the chapter entitled Using the Outside to Help the Inside, I share some of the research and also what I've personally discovered. One of the cruelest things about Alan's lack of working memory means that it's almost impossible for him to measure his own recovery. The passing of the months or years or even the advancement of just one day is often meaningless to him. But for me, getting some sense of progress, of change and of growth is essential, and I've found there's nothing better at helping with this than nature. Getting out into the garden and pruning a rose or planting a bulb is an affirmation that you can envisage a future, a brighter time ahead. And nowadays, even if Al can't remember doing any gardening, showing him that something he's done has reaped rewards, even if it's just raking leaves or mowing the lawn, is a good way to bring structure into his muddled brain. As gardener Monty Don says, gardening is a good way to find beauty in chaos. By becoming in tune with the seasons of growth and fall, preparation and harvest, you make your mind and body happier and healthier. By having a direct stake and involvement with the process of plants growing, of having your hands in the soil and tending it carefully and with love, your world, and everyone else's world too, becomes a better place. I hope I've given you a bit of a taste of what's in the book. There's chapters on all the various encephalitis treatments, tests, scans, rehabilitation, coping with fatigue, talking about illness to friends, building family resilience, tips on visiting hospitals, benefits, support from charities, and how to look after your physical and mental health when you become a carer, and the power of music. These final extracts are from the last chapter. What is recovery? There's an old joke about an Irishman who is asked by a motorist who's gone off course about how he can get to his destination. And I apologise to John in advance for my Irish accent here. The Irishman stands and thinks for a long time before eventually saying, "Well, I wouldn't start from here." That's how recovery feels. Your initial instinct is to remember the point at which the patient was perfectly well and then hope against hope that they will eventually get back to being that person again. But where you need to measure from is the moment from when the patient was the most ill. Recovery is not about trying to get back to where you were, but moving forward to where you were going. Deciding what to call my book was tricky, partly because its story is ongoing. Should we use the ever-popular journey word? Then I thought of our family and how we were buffeted by the choppy waters of Alan's illness, unsure of the way forward, tossing, turning, and sometimes sinking. Gradually, I have realised that many others are in the same boat, and however stormy the sea, it is possible to pull through with help. If you met Al today, I think you'd enjoy chatting to him. He's a people person, good at small talk, he always was, and his brain has got good at leading him into territories he can't navigate. Unless you asked him a direct question, where are we? How did you get here? What day is it? You might not even notice there's something wrong. But tomorrow, he'll have no memory of either you or today's event. However dramatic or momentous the occasion, a huge fireworks display, his own birthday, the new James Bond film, a 600-mile train journey through France, the birth of a grandchild, Christmas Day, he won't remember it. A couple of years after Alan has been in hospital, I'm standing outside my 2 step-granddaughters' bedroom door at their home in North London, listening to Alan laughing with them. He's sitting on the floor with their back against their bunk bed, playing a daft game that I remember him playing with our kids when they were little too. He pretends to glue their hands together and then professes extreme astonishment when it doesn't work and they can escape. Esther is 4 and Tuva's 1, and they're giggling so hard they can't speak. Again and again he does the same thing, and their peals of laughter get merrier and merrier. Then they get hiccups, which sets them all off into even louder jollity. The long years when Alan wasn't capable of playing like this seems like a distant memory. And how glad I am that Alan is no more ill grandpa, he's now funny grandpa. Yet, at the same time, this perfect moment is hanging in its own twist in time. Minutes earlier, Alan couldn't remember where he was or what the girls' names were. And I know that by the next day, he won't be able to remember anything about this at all. Then it occurs to me that Esther and Tuva are so young that they almost certainly won't remember it either. And just like Alan, neither girl is at all bothered by this because none of them are aware of the limitations of their own recall. All of them are suspended in a little world of here and now, a bubble of pure joy. And I'm certain that even if none of them can recollect it afterwards, the happiness will be still embedded in them somewhere. One reviewer said that reading the book was like having a funny, compassionate, well-informed friend by your side to help you. And that is what I wanted it to be. I found the act of writing the book cathartic in some ways, and actually I would encourage anyone to write down their thoughts about illness, as I do think it can help you to process what's happened. Encephalitis and brain injuries can sometimes be termed invisible illnesses, as even MRI scans can't really reveal the complexities of our minds. But I think that those husbands, wives, parents, and children who look after others can also be invisible. I know I've certainly felt like that at times. There are an estimated 6 million unpaid full-time carers in the UK, and I wanted to shine a light on what that role is like while passing on everything I've learnt. It's very moving for me to hear readers say, oh, yeah, that's exactly what it was like about some bits of the book, and also very rewarding to hear from doctors and neurologists that some of our families' experiences have made them see their patients differently. Encephalitis is a terrible illness, but I hope that reading my book will help people to know that they are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing your wonderful wisdom and your amazing humour with us, not just here today in the room, but through your fantastic book, which is available worldwide. Anyone who is interested, we will have some signed copies on the website for our virtual joiners shortly. We've got some time for some questions now, and I do feel I've been perhaps a little bit biased to the virtual joiners so far today and starting with them every time. So let's open the room up to questions first. Does anybody have any questions for our fantastic Catherine? Thank you.
How long did it take you to write your book?
That's quite a hard question because I was not consciously writing a book to start with, but I was jotting down thoughts actually on my phone almost from day one about what was happening, partly because I wanted to remember things to be able to tell the rest of the family about them. We had a family WhatsApp group really early on, which actually would also be one of my kind of tips as to how to tell people about illness, because you could find yourself just saying the same thing again and again and again to other people and parents and everybody. So I was sort of jotting down notes, I suppose. And then after about a year, I thought, I think maybe this is helpful. Maybe this will be helpful for people. So I suppose it probably took a year of actual, it took a lot of thinking. I mean, the whole thing happened 5 years ago, and it was published just last August. So the whole process took quite a long time, but in actual writing terms and editing everything, probably about a year and a half.
Thank so much. I have a comment and then a question from online, if people will forgive me for a... Yeah. So the comment is, wow, excellent, Catherine. I have just purchased the book on Amazon. Thank you, from Demi.
Thank you.
Which is great to hear.
Thank you.
And the question, how is Alan doing now?
Well, as I said, he's here. He's here today. And I think several people in the room alluded to the amount of time that you need to give yourself to recover. And I think my family would absolutely echo that, in that it did seem, when Madeline and I came here and Al was still in hospital, so about 3 months after he first got encephalitis, it seemed impossible to us that the idea that he would be here, really, because at that moment he was lying in a hospital bed. But on the other hand, at the same time, at that point, we were also kind of hoping he would eventually recover completely and be back at work. And, you know, we didn't get that thing that lots of people have talked about today, that you're not going to get back to where you were before. And, you know, Tony talked really movingly about that as well. You have to just kind of, you're getting somewhere else. It's not the place you were. So, I mean, you could ask Al that to how it, but it's an ongoing thing, isn't it? But yeah, no, it's thanks to, I think it's thanks to obviously the fantastic doctors. It's thanks to the fantastic doctors that he is alive. I mean, I never Googled encephalitis at the beginning because I was kind of too frightened of what I was going to find out. And actually, I'm glad I didn't, because I now know, you know, the chances of him dying were relatively high. I think around a third of people who have so, and I didn't know that at the time. I know that now. So I think it was better for me just to count every day as an improvement, which it has been, but it takes a long time. It takes a long time.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions from the room? Oh, yes, we do.
Kind of a question, kind of a statement. Sorry, Laura. Really it's quite...
Sorry, I have to be...
No, you're fine. Thank you, firstly. When Tom and I came along today, I was really hoping that Tom would be able to listen to somebody and connect. And when John, you spoke, Tom definitely did. But also with yourself, Catherine, it's just been lovely. Tom squeezed my hand and really identified with bits that you've said. So thank you for bringing that. Your strength is amazing, and I have half sat where you've sat in a similar way. What are kind of your tips? Because obviously your girls are a lot older than your family with you today. So how do you find the strength to kind of look after your husband, after your girls? It's kind of, they obviously can process a lot more. So do you think that's been harder, having to really deliver explanations to them as well, or?
No, I don't think it has. I think it would be much hard. If I hadn't had the girls and my son Sam, who's also 18, so they're grown up now, but they weren't when it happened. But if I hadn't had them, I don't know how I'd have coped, to be honest. So I think anyone with, every situation is different and everyone's got their own challenges. And again, one of the things I do talk about in the book is I think it's sometimes you have to stop yourself becoming almost that competitive illness syndrome where, you hear someone else's story and you're kind of like, mine's worse than that, or, which I think is really easy to do, actually. But I do think, thank goodness I did have, 3 older children. Nearly the girls were grown up and Sam was, 13. So they were all I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. I mean, as we know, I would have been able to do it because, as someone said, you do what you're stronger than you think you are. But looking back on it, and at the time, I think it was you need support. You need support, and I think one of the things that again struck me was when we went to some Headway meetings as well, and you sometimes heard someone talking about having had a brain injury where they had been completely by themselves. They hadn't had a partner and they hadn't had children and they hadn't had parents. And that just broke my heart because I just thought to have to go through it by yourself is just the worst thing in the world. So I think, any amount. I mean, one of the luckiest things was that we're a very big family. I've got, 2 older stepchildren as well. And as I say, they've got children, so I've got grandchildren who were also helpful because, you know, young children make you feel positive, don't they? And, you know, my parents were alive, they helped. So, yeah, I was really lucky, I think, because I had a massive family to support me, which is yeah, not everyone has. And that's where, you know, I think the Encephalitis Society particularly comes in, because a lot of people have nobody.
Thank you, Tony, so much for that brilliant question, and Catherine for the fantastic answer. I've got another online question for you, Catherine. Question: I've just purchased the book on Amazon. Is it available in bookstores in South Africa at all? Would love my family there to read it.
I don't know. I have no idea whether it's available in South Africa. I know there are, yes, there's certainly, it's not translated, but there's, obviously that's not relevant for South Africa. There are English language editions of it in other countries. So, but yeah, much as you can certainly get it you can get it online from Waterstones online as well as Amazon. I know a lot of people, for obvious reasons, don't necessarily want to buy something on Amazon, although thank you very much for those that have. But yeah, Waterstones online will also get it to you.
Fantastic, thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? Oh, we do. Hand raised high. Go, 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 Laura. I'm going to pay for this in the office next week.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think it's it's not a question, it's actually more of a comment. What is being done to raise awareness from government level? Because you go to doctors, and it's not a question you can answer, but I want to put it to the room. You go to doctors that have absolutely no idea. And it's not just in England, it's global. So yeah, I'd like to ask what's being done. And then I think the idea that you go to a doctor who has confirmation bias, it's been raised so often in the room today with the patient saying, you're going to the doctor and it's like, no, you have a headache or you have whatever. What's being done to actually get information to those doctors, to the social workers on a national level? Because I'm currently suffering. I think my mother, at the age of 80, is probably one of the oldest suffering people, and she still hasn't been diagnosed because the doctors, and unfortunately my mother is one of them who's tried to handle it on her own. She hasn't had the support that she's needed, so she didn't do what you said in your book and be nice to the doctor. She's been to almost every doctor in her area sort of thing to try and resolve this. But I had a conversation and I invited my husband to come and listen to the conversation I was having with her doctor. And he just kept saying all the time, this is legal, get your mother to write a letter. We've been hearing it for years. She's not in a fit state to be able to write a letter. And, you know, for us to be able to speak to her doctor and this kind of thing. And something needs to be done at government level. I think that's my thing out to the room.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember really, really early on in hospital, one of the neurology consultants said, encephalitis is rare, which is, I mean, it is, but although not as rare as they think it is. But the second thing he said, which is what struck a chord, was he said, almost after today's conversation, you will know more about encephalitis than your GP. And I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I've literally only just heard the word, kind of thing. And he was like, you kind of already know most. And that has definitely been proved to be the case. Like as someone else said, once you're out of the hospital and away from experts and back just to GPs, they haven't got the faintest idea. And it was very, very lucky that Alan was diagnosed as quickly as he was. I mean, I think, again, the Encephalitis Society, you know, it's an awareness thing, isn't it, as much as anything? But I completely agree that it's just shocking how people don't know about it.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and I don't know how many people have experienced it in the room, is how the doctor immediately goes to the confirmation bias of this is a psychiatric problem. And my advice to anybody who is going through a similar thing is go and find a neurologist. Some woman the other day, I'm on a parenting site of 37,000 parents, and she put the thing out about a child to say, oh no, it's behaving, blah, blah, blah. And everybody immediately, the parents do it as well, but they're saying, you need to get your child to a psychologist or to a psychiatrist. And then I put myself out there and say, have you ever considered your child might have pandas? Because I see all of these things are so interrelated, and I don't know if people are aware of pandas, but it starts in a child with these massive behavioral issues, and then the parent gets blamed, a little bit like your story, I think, and it is a pathogen or something that is actually attacking the brain.
Yeah, no, I think that again, if I hadn't been there to say what Alan was like before the encephalitis, I don't think the doctors would have believed it. As you say, that they kept saying, has he taken drugs recently? And it was kind of like, no, he's never taken drugs. Like, not has he? But he wouldn't have been able to tell them that. So it was only really, me being, and it was only really by giving them sort of almost evidence. Like, look, yesterday he was running his own business. He was driving a car. He was, in charge of a sales team of however many reps. It was only by giving them hard facts. And today he's like a gibbering wreck. Sorry, but as you say, there is a kind of, oh yeah, but could it be something else? I mean, I don't know. It's so frustrating. It must be so frustrating. I mean, it's awful because the seizures were by far probably the most horrendous bit of the illness to start with. But in a way, looking back on it, we were lucky he had seizures because it was so dramatic. They had to do something about it. If we just had all the other things, the memory loss and the confusion and the saying crazy things and stuff, I think it lots of you will know it could have taken years and years. We might never have got a diagnosis because he was literally unconscious in a coma. It was going like, okay, we're going to have to admit there's actually something going on here. It's, so yeah, no, I completely agree with you.
Thank you, Catherine. I think we just have time for one more comment from online. Anonymous says, Catherine, your book is a must-buy. The humour is truly a therapy that keeps me going. Strange but true, even watching cartoons helps. The rest is history. Thank you so much for joining us today, Catherine.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.